Hi, friends.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back to another episode of Seeds to Healing.
Yep. For those of you that are joining us, welcome. For those of you who are our faithful listeners, we truly appreciate you.
Yes.
And yeah, let's get into it. I feel like I say the same line every time, y'all. I'm sorry, but
It's so catchy.
I
All right, Allie, what are we talking about today?
don't know. What are we talking about today? No, I'm just kidding. So, uh, Ayana and I were talking before we started recording, but also, I believe it was like last week, thinking about y'all, thinking about what we're going to continue to talk about. And we've, came to the conclusion that we've had a lot of good conversations. Um, and something that's kind of threaded throughout almost was social work, right? And
hmm
and we've brought a bunch of different ideas and topics as far as what is all encompassing in social work, in particular to, clinical social
hmm
work.
hmm
Um, and we've also alluded to some more other poor English there. I got a master's. Okay, anyways, I can't spell either, y'all. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Tangent, back on topic. Um, we have also alluded to other parts of what social work are. So we felt like it would be important to let you guys in on the difference between what social work is versus different professions. Because I don't know about you, Ayana, but I know something that I come across very frequently is people mislabeling my professional certification.
hmm
Basically like what I am. And I think it's it comes with I think for a number of reasons, naiveness, just not knowing, the field, not knowing or being familiar with it. And then the other being, kind of going back to the whole mental health awareness type of topic, it just becoming something that people are talking about. And so I think it's also important to let you guys know what are the different, fields, and so you guys can accurately understand and label professionals by, their title and what they actually are.
Yeah, I think that's the tricky part is because social work has so many different lanes.
Yeah.
I can see how easily people can get confused on like what we're doing. I think for a long time, social workers have been portrayed as like the baby snatchers.
Yeah.
So just people who come in and take kids, and that's all that social work is and all that it does, which is such a misconception. Like, yes, county work and CPS is a part of social work, but it's a very small portion to what the duality and what social workers can actually do as a whole.
Oh yeah. And I will be honest with you, before going into my master's program, I actually did not know
Mm,
how vast like social work is. Like
yeah.
it is fairly vast, and it was really cool for me to learn
hmm
how much you can do as a social worker, and
Yeah.
how, how many options you have.
Yeah. And I think that's because what social work is, and Allie and I were talking about this earlier, is that social work is just like understanding people, society, the disadvantages, the advantages, how everything has played an impact, an individual, a community, and the world altogether is
Hmm.
what social work is. We look at problems not only from a global, but community, and then we look at it to the individual, where a lot of our um other areas of mental health can kind of look solely on the person or solely on the community when we have been trained to do all of the all of the above in great detail. So
Hmm.
something that you'll hear us talk about is the difference between like MFTs, so marriage family therapist, and
Hmm.
social workers, although both can be licensed to give therapy. So social workers can be licensed clinical social workers, which allows them to give therapy.
Hmm.
The difference is that with the marriage family, they're looking solely at the individual. So it's if
Mm-hmm.
it's the person they're seeing, the couple that they're seeing, the family that they're seeing, that's what they look at. And although they do have an understanding of how everything else plays a part of that, as social worker, we pay just as much attention as to the individual as we do their marriage, their family, the schools that they went to, the community that they grew up, where they grew up. We take a much larger view and detailed view of every other part. Whereas for some, it can be solely focused on the individual or whoever they're treating at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's like point number one, right? Is,
Hmm.
what is the difference between a social worker and I guess we can start with like, what is the difference between a social worker and a therapist and the other mental health professions that people would run by, right? And I think that was a really
Hmm.
great um, explanation of what the social worker is and what they look at versus like a marriage and family therapist. And
Hmm.
then you also have other branches of specialty that people can do counseling in, right? So
Hmm.
there's the psychologist, there's this psychiatrist,
Hmm.
there's the CPC, which is relatively new, which is a counseling professional, um, or a certified professional counselor. I forgot the other C. And I feel like there's licensed marriage and family therapist. Am I missing one? I feel like there's another one, but maybe those are the ones that we'll just focus on.
Hmm.
Probably LCSW, which is licensed clinical social worker, is the other one that I'm missing. But yeah, so like getting into that more, right? Like, so
Hmm.
there's actually distinctions between, so Anna did a great job of explaining the difference between a social worker versus a marriage and family therapist, but then there's a difference between a social worker and um a psychologist, right? Which is different schooling, different concentration, right? So
Hmm.
the difference between a social worker and a psychologist is, again, social workers focus on the whole individual. Psychologists are more likely to focus on the neurological, physiological aspects of an individual, right?
Hmm.
They're very science based, heavy
Hmm.
on science, heavy on the human beings, like social interaction, but
Hmm.
on a neurological level.
Hmm.
Um, and that I think is something to be distinguished, right? Because a psychologist also has the ability to work with certain things that a marriage and family therapist probably wouldn't be able to. Licensed clinical social workers can see anybody, right? But
Hmm.
um, psychologists, I believe, can also see anybody. Marriage and family therapists can only see individuals and couples, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so there's those certain ramifications that I think also make a distinction, but just understanding like kind of what you're also getting yourself into. Anything that I'm missing with the psychologist, Ayana, that you
No,
want
I
to?
think I think that that's just it. I think every lane has a concentration, and that very much is their concentration. Yeah. No, I think you hit everything
Yeah.
stellar.
And so I can piggyback off of this one as well, but I wanted to make the distinction as well between a psychiatrist because I hear people tell me or ask me a lot of the times if I'm a psychiatrist or they'll
Hmm.
label me as a psychiatrist, right? And so how would you describe a psychiatrist? We're kind of playing popcorn right now.
Yeah, for sure. So a psychiatrist, for the most part, as simple terms as I can try to find it, also look solely at the individual, and their diagnosis. So they do a lot of looking at the behaviors about how the individual is either responding to things, acting in things, whatever triggers they may have, and diagnosing them. This is where some people get their ADHD or their PTSD or whichever diagnosis. Also can come from other places, but when it comes from here, it usually is followed by medication treatment,
Mm-hmm.
very much on the narrow of medicine helping you to get back on track. So that's what they focus on. So you may see a therapist who may then refer you to a psychiatrist, so that way you can, if that's something you and your therapist feels like could be the next step, that's an area where you'll talk to them
Mm-hmm.
They'll kind of partner together. You'll get a diagnosis from there and then start that medication or be able to talk about that medication with somebody who has a better understanding of what it is and how it works with those diagnoses.
Right. Don't mind me over here making noises.
Yep.
No, you are definitely hit the nail on the head with that one. And that I say that's the biggest distinction between a, marriage and family therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and I believe the last one, did I mention another one, y'all? Man, I'm brain farting today.
The professional counselor.
Professional counselor. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that one is relatively, I think, new in the field of mental health. It's if we were to talk in tiers, and this is not to bash anybody who has this professional license, but if we were to talk in like tiers, right? An individual who holds um a professional counseling license would be like the underneath a marriage and family therapist, right? And so they're still able to see the individual, but they have certain limits as
Hmm.
to what they can do as far as diagnosis go and who they can see,
Hmm.
right? As far as what that person is diagnosed with, they can only see a certain amount of people. I believe they cannot see and not diagnose like psychosis,
Mm.
and personality disorder is typically not something that's diagnosed, but I believe that's maybe another limitation that they have.
Mm.
Don't quote me on that. You guys can definitely look into that. It's one that's relatively more recent, um, but it's still a clinical license, meaning that they still do the therapy,
Hmm.
right? But their limitations are very different than one of a licensed social worker or a clinical social worker and of a marriage and family therapist.
Hmm.
Um, they, yeah, but they can still do the counseling. They can still do the therapy. So I think those are the distinctions between all of those different fields. And I know for me, the reason that I wanted to get on here and talk about this is I think it's important to just know who you're seeing,
Yeah.
right? And also to know what you are looking for,
Hmm.
right? Because someone could just want to do a lot of talk therapy, which you could do with a CPC, right? You could even do it with an LMFT or a LCSW. But it's just certain diagnosis and certain depths, maybe, and in ways of doing therapy would look different based off of the type of professional that you're going to see. So
Hmm.
I think it's kind of keeping that in mind, like how do you want to do therapy? What are you looking for? Because it could also determine which professional licensure you would seek in your
Yeah.
therapist.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that that's good. I think knowing the difference. I also think for people who are getting interested in it, I know that social work and just the mental health uh area is becoming a very hot topic for a lot of people
mhm,
who want to fight and be advocates for people, marginalized populations. So individuals who are the best way to describe a marginal population is when you look at the paper and you see the margin off to the left.
mm,
It's the populations or the group of people who are often pushed aside to the left and kind of left out of things, or however you want to look at that, left out of things, hurt, whatever that looks like. So
mhm,
the marginalized population, just being advocates for them, this is a great thing. I think another really cool thing about social work is that before, I want to say, I don't, they told me what year, but I can't remember it. Before a couple years ago, anybody could call themselves a social worker. So if you were an advocate, you could call yourself, oh, I'm a social worker for this because of the work that I'm doing, because social work is advocacy and all of these things. And it was
mhm,
just passed a law a couple years ago, I believe, that you actually can't do that anymore. You have to go through and get the schooling, which just shows the importance of social work and how educated we have had to be,
mhm,
to understand and to get past one, our own biases. Everybody and their mother has a bias,
mhm,
whether you think whether it's extreme or not, we all have these different biases of things. So to be able to put that aside and work with the exact people that you could have had a biases is something that we're trained on to do, for just an example. And we're trained so that way we can work in several different realms. There are social workers that work in policies. There are
Yep.
social workers that work in governments. There are social workers. I just found this out yesterday that I thought was so cool. They're investigative social workers. So they work on crime scenes. They work like all of these things, they work there as well. There are social workers that work for Disney, social workers that work for Netflix, social workers that work for Meta, which is your Facebook, Instagram, all of these things. We're all over the place because we have an understanding of people. We have
Mm-hmm.
an understanding of society and social concepts and how that has affected things. And when you bring social workers into conversations about people, your conversations look different because we have an understanding. We're able to pinpoint where people may be left out or how this affects people or why people are responding that way. So, for example, for you're thinking, I was thinking when I first heard this, like, why do social workers need to be at Google and Instagram? Like, for
Mm-hmm.
me, made no sense until one of my professors explained it and was just like, the main goal of social media is so that people can be social. So, how do
Mm-hmm.
we make sure that people are able to do that safely, that people are able to do that in a way that is supportive and helpful? And who else than to grab social workers, right? Because we look at the whole and not just the individual.
Yeah. No, great. Honestly, you just taught me. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So that's
Fun
really
fact.
cool. I take pride in
Yeah.
being a social worker just because I think that's probably the coolest part of our careers is that we are part of a community that is for genuinely for the people,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's really important to just, toot our own horns, but we definitely are just wanting to get across that it's social workers are so much bigger than what they've been painted out to be.
Yeah.
And it's so much more than even what we're doing, right?
Right.
Like um and I've kind of ventured in. I'll share like a part of my background in my career a little bit in how social work can kind of just play out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've always been an advocate for other people and I've always had a heart for other people. That's kind of how I stepped into the field. And I'm actually kind of a dual places. Honestly, I think you would consider me more of like a meso social worker because of the simple fact that I do therapy, right? I'm for the individual. I do therapy. I do micro is what they would call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also now venturing into the nonprofit world, which is also another area that I recently learned while I was in school that you can be a nonprofit, like a social worker,
Yeah.
right? A social worker within a nonprofit. And I've done that, and I think it's really cool to just know that I've continued to exercise my social work career in
Mm-hmm.
like all aspects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really cool. It's really cool to see just how big. And if anyone were to ask me, and this is probably my own bias, but if anyone were to ask me like which field they should go into, I guess it depends on your personality, but
Yeah.
I would definitely advocate for social work and a
Mm-hmm.
clinical license as a social worker
Mm-hmm.
because it's so comprehensive
Yeah.
and you can do so much. Now, the other professions are just as great,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess it just depends on you and the personality. If you're wanting to venture out and, extend yourself out, I think um, clinical social work and or master's in social work would definitely be something to look into.
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing for me, um, one of the biggest things is like everybody plays a role, right?
Hmm.
So all of the fields that we just listed all play a role and some of them can play dual roles. So like Allie's saying, she has her license, so she's able to be that dual role of a social worker and a therapist.
Hmm.
But everybody plays a certain role into someone's success. So if we have a client who um but social workers, especially us without our license yet, are link connectors. We
Mm-hmm.
are what connects the individual to the link that they need, the support that they need, the resources that they need. That all comes through us. So, for example, I do not have my license yet. So if I'm working as somebody's social worker, my goal is to get them whatever they need. So if I'm talking with this individual and we are both on the same page that they need to try therapy, and maybe see a psych because they think medicine may help too. Like I'm the one who goes and finds a therapist and says, okay, let me link you to them. Let me link you to this psych. Let me link you to this. That's what a social workers without license can be the very hub, even if they have license. Obviously, they can
Mm-hmm.
be that too. But all of them are needed. We just play different roles. And some of us, especially social workers and especially those licensed social workers, can jump to one or more.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, we don't do any medication.
Mm-mm.
Right. We don't do any medications, like prescribing that or anything, but we can, when you're a therapist, look into diagnosis, tell the clients you're looking a little bit more this way. Here are some possible treatments. Maybe we get you with a psych eval. Maybe we try some coping skills. Maybe we try other things, whatever that looks like, to help them get the answers that way. But everyone plays a certain role, and some people need certain areas more. So someone may not need a psych evaluation, so they might not need to see a psychiatrist. They just need therapy, or they
Mm-hmm.
may need more than therapy. They may need the psychiatrist. So, I think it's important to know that they all are important. They all play a role into someone's and multiple people's successes, and they're more than what you think. Like if you think a therapist is just somebody who sits there and listens to somebody talk, you definitely haven't been to therapy, because there are some of
Yeah.
the people that will push your buttons and you just kind of be like, mm, like
Mm-hmm.
this is not. Everybody thinks that therapy is like laying down on the couch, and maybe for the first session it's laying on the couch, but after that you're putting in some work.
Yeah.
Like you're really doing it. So I think it's just good to know, and then it's a bonus to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to just have the knowledge, right? So
Mm-hmm.
because I've had a number of clients and parent like because I used to work with children a lot and teens, and I'd have a number of parents like coming in and more so in the minority community. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to pay attention to that too,
Mm-hmm.
is they would come in and like call me doctor,
Mm,
right? And that's one thing that a licensed clinical social worker is not. We do not hold unless you can
right.
most definitely get your PhD in social work, but you don't have to, right? And so
Mm,
as a licensed clinical social worker, you are not a doctor.
right.
And that's something that I've had to clarify with clients as well. And that's another reason why I wanted to bring up this topic, right? Because I hear often where they'll be like, oh, you're the doctor, or you're the psychiatrist, or you're the psychologist. And I'm like, I'm none of those things, with no disrespect, right? And just being able to just clarify that, just so that you guys have that
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
little tip. This is a little tip
Right.
episode.
Right. Right. Explaining where we are, where we come from, and why it all makes sense. I think it's so awesome. I love the idea of like one of the reasons why social work was so appealing to me. I think for me was like the idea of helping people, being advocacies, but also the idea that I could have my hand in several different ponds of waters and still be
Mhm.
making an impact in every one. So if I wanted to do policy writing, or I wanted to do grant writing for nonprofits, or I wanted to do a therapist, like I can have my hands in all of these and not have to go through three times the schooling or four
Mhm.
times the schooling. Was one of the things that I was like, okay, done deal. I'm going.
No, same. And for me, my little selling point was like originally I wanted to become a psychologist and get my PhD, and I was like told that if I went into social work, I didn't have to do that.
Mm,
I didn't have to, because having an LCSW is what they would consider a terminal degree,
yeah.
meaning like you don't need to go further. You
Mm-hmm.
will do all that you can, and all that you need is would be with an LCSW.
Yeah, that's what I heard
So,
too. It's like the only difference between an LCSW and a doctorate is that you can teach. For me, at some point, I will be going for my doctorates because I love teaching. So
mhm.
I'll be there. But if I hated teaching, that's it. Bing, bang, boom.
Yeah,
Done deal.
and I don't know if I'll ever venture into the teaching world. It's been suggested, but I'm also like I'm terrible at explaining myself, y'all. And try to explain to students? What? No.
Corey. Yeah, here
Y'all would
for
get
it.
A's if you were in my class just
Exactly.
for writing your name on a piece of paper.
Let's just have a conversation. Ace for everybody. This is
Let's
your
just
quiz.
talk. Let's just talk.
Let's practice what we're learning. A little therapy for everybody.
Yeah, no, not me. That's where
Yeah.
we differ. We're similar in a lot of places,
Hmm.
Ayannah, but this is
We
where we
are.
differ.
We really are.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Social work is epic. And we're not just baby snatchers.
Oh
That's my
yes. Oh my goodness. The amount of people that genuinely still think that or we're robots. I've been called
yeah.
a robot before.
I think two things. Well, I think we're called that for two things. One, media has always portrayed social workers as just people who come in, take the babies, and like you have to go through all this hassle to get them back. And two, for a lot of minorities, it's the only experience they have of social workers because
Mm,
one, they're not privy to a spot where they can get social workers elsewhere, and two, they're not privy to like a lot of minorities still believe that like therapy is for rich white people,
that's true.
So
Hmm.
I although the term bugs me, I love to educate people. I'm like, no, actually, we do a lot more for that. And there's so much availability for you. And therapist isn't a really which right thing. It can really help you here and now, like
Hmm.
all of these things. And I think it's awesome to see um social workers venturing out and going and doing more work in minority areas. So
Hmm.
the idea of a social worker is changed. Like you can be 23 and have a social worker and it not be because you are a bad parent. You
Hmm.
can have a social worker because you're in the hospital and you need somebody to talk on your behalf. You can have a social worker because you're going through a program and need somebody to work. It could be your case manager and they're helping you get your life back together. There's so many areas that social workers now being highlighted for other than just CPS and like taking
Hmm.
kids. Um, Although that is still a spot and it's not taking kids, it's making sure that they're safe. And do social workers get it wrong? Of course, we're humans. Like some social workers get it really wrong, and I don't know how
Hmm.
they get it so wrong, but they do. And we're human. And there's some social workers that are great and save the day. And so I think it's just an understanding that there's a lot more to social work than that. And even in that, we're doing our best to be the link to
Hmm.
make sure that the children or whoever our client is at their optimum health, making sure that they get to a point where they're supported, they have all the resources that they need, and that they're good to soar on their own. And even when
Hmm.
they're not, that they have a backup plan on what that looks like.
Hmm.
If you ever
Yeah.
need a backup plan, call a social worker because we are key,
We are here to save the day. No, I'm just kidding.
okay? Key on
Uh,
making backup plans.
yes, that's honestly a really big part of our training is being able to be a great case manager is essentially
Mm-hmm.
what you are describing. And being able to manage somebody, an individual in their life, their case, right?
Mm-hmm.
In being able to, like you said, I really liked the link connector because that's
Mm-hmm.
essentially what we are, and we're kind of all over the place, and we're all over the place for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
because we want to work for the people and we
Yep.
want to be able to help, and honestly in any area that you can, as you hear, like we're all the way up into the government, we're all the way
Yeah.
up into the social media realm, and it's because it's needed, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's just all the more reason that like the conversations are important around mental health and mental health awareness, and just the mental health field, because social work essentially started, to help others that needed the resources, right? That
Mm-hmm.
because they were being affected mind, by their mind, but also by their environment and all of those aspects. And so just being able to um, just provide, I think, is just one of the biggest. I don't know, wins for me as a
Yeah.
person, and
Yeah,
a person that holds a master's in social work.
for sure.
Uh, Not to say all the other ones aren't great, again, because they are.
Right.
They are. If you are or know somebody who is in one of the other professions that we listed, we're not hating.
No.
We're not hating.
And social work isn't for everybody. Maybe your
Nope.
idea is
Mhm.
like maybe your idea of everything is like, hey, I can't save like the idea that this is everybody's idea and I have to change all this isn't for me, but I can help the individual
Mhm.
navigate whatever cards they're dealt. Then maybe therapy is the best for you. Um, Social work is not for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart. Not to say everything else is for the faint of heart. To be in mental health, period, deserves more flowers than what any of the areas get. But just knowing yourself and knowing what's better. What do you understand more? Is it easier? Not even easier, because I do think that there are times we should challenge ourselves. But if working with the person is the only thing that makes sense or the thing that really grasps your attention, like you don't really
Mhm.
care about the rest, then
Mhm.
maybe MFT is the way to go. Or
Mhm.
if you want to be the link connector and you want to be uh, effective in a different way, like understanding more about one profession and all the other professions and how they differ can help you define which area you should go in.
Right. Because I know, Ayana and my heart is really just about providing, knowledge and wisdom for the people, right? For
Mm-hmm.
you guys, for our listeners, and, for whoever catches this, just so that you can know what you're getting yourself into, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what being able to make the decision for yourself on what you feel sounds like it aligns with you the best and what, treatment you would want to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
And I'm always an advocate, even within therapy, right, to fill out, the therapist that you're working with, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
about a relationship and understanding that this is also another piece of knowledge that you can take into that. Like when they say, oh, hi, my name's so and so, and I have an LMF, like I have a marriage and family therapy license, or my name's so and so, and I'm a psychologist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
I'm a LCSW. Like a lot of the times, I know I introduce myself with my acronyms, and I know other professionals who do the same. And so being able to have those acronyms thrown at you and you being like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I kind of understand where they're going to come from,
Right.
right?
Yeah, for sure. And if you don't know, ask questions. I think
Yes.
I think sometimes in society we get afraid to ask questions or to look dumb, but girl, if somebody tells you they're an LCSW and you're like, ask, what is that? What does that look like? What do you specialize in? These are questions that we're prepared to answer. So I think that's just another tip. Ask questions.
Yes. Yes. 100%.
For sure, Z's.
Did we have another point, or was this the main one? This is the
We
main
don't,
one, right?
yeah, that was just it. I think the only other thing that I want to add on to add to the Christian perspective,
Oh, yes. Got me
um,
forgetting, y'all. I'm sorry.
sometimes it just be
We're
like,
recording late tonight,
you
so.
know, it's late. It's just I went to a Baptist university, so I got some free little like sprinkles of it in there. So I
Mhm.
love just throwing it in where I can. But one of the things they talked about is social work as agitators, right? So we're here to shake up the system, shake up the idea of what people think is normal, and kind of expose where people are hurting or where things are lacking or where policies are putting people in predicaments and in hardships and change all of those things.
Mhm.